Hey y'all, and welcome to another episode of Becoming No One. I'm your host, Big Taj, and today we're going to finish Stanza 4. So just to recap on Stanza 4, this is where we get the development of the planetary spirits that not only create the form and the archetypes of the manifested universe, but also keep the records of karma. So we're going to jump right back in. This episode actually brought me a lot of clarity, so I'm super excited to share it with you guys. Now, we left off at Stanza 4, Part 4, and Part 4 says, "This was the army of the voice, the divine septenary. The sparks of the seven are subject to and the servants of the first, second, and third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh of the seven. These sparks are called spheres, triangles, cubes, lines, and modelers. For thus stands the eternal Nadana, the O-I-O, the permutation of A-E-I-O-U, which we talked about before, as like everything, once it separates from the all, it becomes defined as one instead of zero because we need to create some type of distinction between the two. Part A says, this sloka gives again a brief analysis of the hierarchies of the Dohan Kohan, called devas or gods in India, or the conscious intelligent power of nature. To this hierarchy corresponds the actual types into which humanity may be divided. For humanity as a whole is in reality a materialized, though as yet imperfect expression thereof. The army of the voice is a term closely connected with the mystery of sound and speech as an effect and corollary of the cause, divine thought. As beautifully expressed by P. Christian, the learned author of The History of Magic and of L'Homme Rouge des Tuileries, the words spoken by as well as the name of every individual largely determined his future's fate. Why? Because when our soul or our mind creates or evokes a thought, the representative sign of that thought is self-engraved upon the astral fluid, which is the receptacle and, so to say, the mirror of all of the manifestation of being. The sign expresses the thing. The thing is hidden or occult virtue of the sign, meaning like they're one of the same thing. To pronounce a word is to evoke a thought and to make it present. The magnetic potency of the human speech is the commencement of every manifestation in the occult world. To utter a name is not only to define a being or an entity, but to place it under and condemn it through the emission of word or verbum. Verbum is the word for logos in Latin. Okay, so to the influence of one or more occult potencies, things are for every one of us that which the word makes them while naming them. The word verbum, or the speech of every man, is quite unconsciously to himself a blessing or a curse. This is why our present ignorance about the properties or attributes of the idea, as well as about the attributes and properties of matter, is often fatal to us. Yes, names and words are either beneficent or maleficent, meaning good or bad. They are in a certain sense either venomous or health-giving, according to the hidden influences attached by supreme knowledge to their elements, that is to say, to the letters which compose them and the numbers correlative to these letters. This is strictly true as an esoteric teaching accepted by all Eastern schools of occultism in the Sanskrit, as also in Hebrew and all other alphabets. Every letter has its occult meaning and its rationale. It is a cause and effect of a preceding cause, and a combination of these very often produces the most magical effect. The vowels especially contain the most occult and formidable potencies. The mantras, esoterically, magically, rather than religiously, are chanted by Brahmins, and so are the Vedas and other scriptures. The army of voice is the prototype of the host of the logos, or the word, or the Sefer Jezrai, called in the secret doctrine the one issued from the no number, which is the one eternal principle. The esoteric theology begins with the one, manifested therefore not eternal in its presence and beginning, if eternal in its essence. The number of the numbers and numbered, the latter proceeding from the voice, the feminine vash, satarupa of the 100 forms or nature. It is from the number 10 or creative nature, the mother, the occult cipher or not, ever procreating and multiplying in union with the unit I, one, or the spirit of life, that the whole universe proceeds. Okay, so before we start fully unpacking this, I want to first point out two random things. So one, when they're talking about the army of voices, right, being the prototype of host of logos or word, this is the same as the one number being issued from the no number or the one eternal principle. They're talking about the same thing. Now, before we move on, I also want to point out something that is in the Gospel of John, where it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. However, I talked about this on TikTok. If you follow me, this is actually a mistranslation. It's supposed to say in the beginning was Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. Okay, Logos is the Greek word for word. Okay, so word means logos in Greek, and verbum means logos in Latin. Okay, so now understand that there are three kinds of logos, which we've talked about when we talked about the first three stanzas. So let's go through them real quick. At the source of everything is the absolute. Inside the absolute is the germ of potential, also called the first logos. Now, this is beingness, not being. This is what we would call that state of darkness or that state of non-being if we were put it into reference points that we can understand, okay? Now, out of this comes the second logos, which is the germ of differentiation between spirit and matter, okay? So both are manifested and unmanifested at the same time. So you're being and non-being at the same time, which is basically this stage of, like, say you have an idea, right? It's just unmanifested potential that you have not brought into, the real world yet. Okay. Now, out of this comes the third logos, which is manifested cosmic ideation. And remember, we talked about cosmic ideation before. Okay, this is where we get our universal consciousness and intelligence from. So it is the spirit or the mind. Now, from the third logos comes the septenary principle, which creates the foundation for the universe. Now, the seven principles are also called the seven planetary logos or logis. This third logos is where the starting point for the Manifesting dawn happens, and manifested activity starts here. So the prior two logos were just unmanifested potential or frequencies, right? Potency is what the secret doctrine usually calls a frequency. Now think about this. What is the physical manifestation of thought or an idea? Word. Okay, word, because word makes present to others what you are thinking. So I thought about this in a couple different ways. When they say in the beginning was the logos, this is referring to the first logos that was unmanifested, or this beingness, right? And the logos was with God, meaning it was still one with source, and the logos was God, meaning even when it separates from source, it is still of God. All right. And then I also thought about this on a microcosm level, all right, where words or logos is manifest energy. So in the beginning was the logos, this unmanifested potential or frequency or thought or idea, and the logos was with God, meaning cosmic ideation. The logos is spirit, okay? It comes from spirit, which is a direct connection to God energy or source. So the third logos, and the logos was God. To me, this means that everything starts as a thought or an idea, which comes from this universal intelligence that connects us to God energy called spirit. Then through words, we manifest the thoughts and ideas onto the material plane. Now, y'all tell me what y'all think about this, because we already understand that there are no original thoughts. There is a frequency of energy correlating to the thought potential that we could come in contact with, and we can choose whether or not we want to manifest that frequency on this physical plane or not. So all of this energy comes from this fifth plane, which is where the Akashic records are, which is where the universal intelligence is, right? And if you choose not to manifest the energy through your words or actions, then someone else can come and match that frequency of unmanifested potential and bring that into existence, okay? So we talked about this in the episode when we're talking about the planes of existence. The first logos is stanza 1. The second logos is stanza 2. The third logos is stanza 3. And the septenary principle is stanza 4. The video when I talk about the Gospel of John is on my TikTok. I suggest you go watch it because I did a really good job of breaking down exactly what that means on a macrocosm level and a microcosm level. I just kind of briefly overviewed it here just so that you can understand that that was a mistranslation. It was really letting us know that the universe is mental, and everything starts as this thought before we can manifest it into this physical reality. Now, there's two other things that I want you to take away from what we read, okay? Another thing is that words are manifest activity, meaning that you manifest through not only your thoughts, but your words. This can be a blessing and or a curse, because if you are ignorant to the power of manifestation through thought and speech, then you can go around creating reality that is not aligned with who you are or who you want to be. Now, the second thing is, the reason why it says that your name determines your fate is because names hold a core frequency, which, like a fingerprint, are unique only to you. So when someone says your name, they are making manifest of the frequency that is you, okay? So they could also be directing something towards you and that frequency, all right? So this is why I feel like Black people back in the day used to create nicknames or specific names for their soul so that no one knows their real name or their core frequency, because Our name is the symbol that represents us. There is no way to separate us from the symbol because we are the symbol, okay? So the symbol represents us. That's why it's a blessing or a curse, because it creates your specific frequency and it is programmed with specific potencies. But if someone wants to cause harm to you and direct negative attention to you, they can do that with your name, which is your core frequency, because how we feel when we speak a certain frequency gets attached and directed towards that frequency. That's why people say if you don't have anything good to say, don't say it at all. Just a random trick that I've been taught is, if you go around telling people what your actual name is all the time, create a name that is separate from the name that you call yourself and don't tell anybody. And this is going to be what you believe to be the name of your soul. And you really do have to believe it. And every time you're doing protection or you're praying, or you're praying for protection for yourself, pray it over that name, because as long as you believe it, nobody can mess with it, all right? Because everything in this reality is based off of your belief system. And also, if nobody knows what your core name is or what you consider to be your core frequency, then when they direct any type of harm towards you, you have this extra layer of protection because you don't consider that name to be you. The next part says the Anugita, a conversation is given in chapter 6:15 between a Brahmin and his wife on the origins of speech and its occult properties. The wife asks how speech came into existence and which was prior to the other, speech or mind. The Brahmin tells her that the apana, which is inspirational breath, becoming Lord, changes that intelligence which does not understand speech or words into the state of apana, and thus opens the mind. Thereupon he tells her a story, a dialogue between speech and mind. It goes, both went to the self of being, which means to them, they think it means the higher self, to Parajapati, according to the commentator, and asked him to destroy their doubts and decide which of them proceeds and was superior to the other. To this the Lord said, mind is superior, but speech answers the self of being by saying, I verily yield you your desires, meaning that by speech he acquired what he desired. Thereupon, again, the self told her that there are two minds, the movable and the immovable. The immovable is with me, he said. The movable is in your dominion of speech, of the plane of matter. To that you are superior, but in as much, O beautiful one, as you came personally to speak to me in the way you did, proudly, therefore, O Savati, you shall never speak after heard exhalation. The goddess of speech, Sarasvati, a later form or aspect of Vash, the goddess also of secret learning of or esoteric wisdom, verily dwelt always between the prana and the apana. But, O noble one, going with the apana wind or the vital air, though impaled without the prana expirational breath, she ran up to the Parajapati, the Brahma, saying, be pleased, O venerable sir. Then the prana appeared again, nourishing speech, and therefore speech never speaks after hard or inspirational exhalation. It is always noisy or noiseless. Of these two, the noiseless is the superior to the noisy. The noisy is the speech. So the speech, which is produced in the body by means of prana, and which then is transformed into apana, and then becoming assimilated with udana, physical organs of speech, then finally dwells in the samana at the navel of the form of speech as the material cause of all words. So speech formerly spoke, hence the mind is distinguished by reason of it being immovable, and the goddess speech by reason of her being movable. This allegory is at the root of occult law, which prescribes silence upon the knowledge of certain secret and invisible things perceptible only to the spiritual mind or the sixth sense, and which cannot be expressed by noisy or uttered speech. This chapter of Anugita says Arjuna, Paranayama, or regulation of breath in yoga practices. This mode, however, without the previous acquisition of, or at least full understanding of the two higher senses, of which there are 7, as will be shown, pertains rather to the lower yoga. The hatha called was and is still discountenanced by the arhats. It is injurious to health and alone can never be developed into Raj Yoga. This story is quoted to show how inseparably connected are in the metaphysical of old intelligent beings, or rather intelligence, with every sense or function, whether physical or mental. The occult claim that there are 7 senses in man as in nature, and there are 7 states of consciousness, which is corroborated in the same work, chapter 6, on Pratyahara, the restraint and the regulation of the senses. Pranayama being that of the vital winds or breath. The Brahma speak in it of the institution of the 7 sacrificial priests or the hostess. He says the nose and the eyes and the tongue and the skin and the ears are the 5th, or smell, sight, taste, touch, and hearing. Mind and understanding are the 7 sacrificial priests separately stationed, and which dwelling in a minute space still do not perceive each other. On the sensuous plane, none of them except mind. For mine says, the nose smells not without me. The eye does not take in color. I am the eternal chief among the elements or the senses. Without me, the senses never shine. Like an empty dwelling or like fires, the flames of which are extinct. Without me, all beings like fuel, half dried and half moist, fail to apprehend qualities or objects even when the senses exerting themselves. So this part is just talking about the separation in mind, which is what they call the movable and immovable. The movable would be the infinite mind or the subconscious mind, while the immovable would be the finite mind or the conscious mind. Now, the subconscious mind connects you to spirit or universal consciousness, while the conscious mind connects you to the material plane or world. Ideas come first from the subconscious mind and then are articulated using the conscious mind. So the mind comes before speech, meaning first you have the thought, which you have to process, which we know from the astral projection episode, which is then manifested using the words. The idea or thoughts come from the right side of the brain, which is responsible for daydreaming or imagination, and speech and analysis come from the left side of the brain. That should help you understand why the society we live in tries to suppress the right hemisphere, because if they can weaken our ability to imagine and come up with ideas which require us to connect with source, then they can become the source of our ideas, which lead to manifestation, literally playing God without us knowing it. Now, in this passage, it says there is a noisy speech and a noiseless speech, pointing out that noiseless speech is how you communicate with your higher self, the God within, or with spirit. And noisy speech is how you communicate in the material plane. That means we can talk without opening our mouths. So those of us who have a connection to spirit also have the powers of telepathy. Now, real quick, there's a trend going around on TikTok where certain people are saying that they don't have a voice inside their head, or they can't hear a voice inside their head. And I noticed the theme in the type of people who are saying this. And they're saying that they don't have to think about things, they just do it. So that should be very telling, because there are 2 types of beings that live here, mankind and human beings. One is artificial and not original or natural to this planet, and the other is natural to this planet. And we know that it's natural to this planet because they have neuromelanin in their eyes and in their skin and can withstand being in the sun. But I digress. Now, the other part of this is discussing the 7 senses, and yes, I said 7. 5 are known to us and 2 are supposedly hidden, which they refer to as the higher senses. Okay, so the 7 senses are meant to help you navigate the physical world and unlock the knowledge or truth of this plane, while the other 2 hidden ones are meant to help you connect with spirit during this process. I think it's important for us to understand that they are saying that yes, you have the regular 5 senses that we have been told about, but the other 2 senses are your mind and also your understanding. Okay, that's your spirit and your soul, right? You remember I talked about the Holy Trinity. I talked about your mind is meant for you to take in the knowledge, right? You apply your emotions to whatever information that you have received to give you understanding, which will tell you what to do. To me, that makes complete fucking sense that those 2 would be a part of the senses, because those 2 things help us process our environment. It just hasn't been disclosed to us. Now, the next part says, this, of course, with regard only to mind on the sensuous plane, spiritual mind, the upper portion or aspect of the impersonal manas, takes no cognizance of the senses in the physical man. However, the ancients were acquainted with the correlation of forces and all the recently discovered phenomenon of mental and physical faculties and functions, with many more mysteries also, may be found in reading, which is chapter 6 and 7 of this in Philosophy and Mystic Learning, which is priceless work. Now, see the quarrel of the senses about their respective superiority, and their taking the Brahman, the Lord of all creatures, for their arbiter. You are all greatest and not greatest, or superior to objects, as a Misra says, none being independent of the other. You are all possessed of one another's qualities. All are great in their own sphere and all support one another. There is one unmoving, which is the life wind or the breath, the yoga inhalation, so called, which is the breath of the one or higher self, that is the own self accumulated in numerous forms. This breath, voice, self, or wind, called pneuma, is the synthesis of the seven senses, numerally all minor deities, and esoterically the septenary and the army of voices. So this is basically letting you know that your higher self does not need your physical senses in order for it to operate. And it also wants us to understand that we are all connected. We all possess one another's qualities, okay? So we learn through each other, right? And we all have this breath or this wind or this voice in common, right? That are directly attached to our seven senses, which are minor deities, which are these planetary spirits, these devas, these archangels, regular angels, pretis, rishis, whatever you want to call them. They are these seven essences which are correlated with our seven senses. It also says without the breath of life, we would not be able to feel our senses, okay? We would kind of be in this state of the second logos where you're unmanifested and manifested at the same time, almost as if you're in a meditative state, right? When you don't have the spark of life, right? When you don't have the electricity, you don't have the soul running through your atoms, you're not in motion, you don't have access to your seven senses because your seven senses come from that breath of life. Now, part B of this says, next we see cosmic matter scattering and forming itself into elements, grouped into the mystic four within the fifth element, aether, the lining of Akasa and the Amina Mundi, or mother of the cosmos. Dots, lines, triangles, cubes, circles, and finally spheres. Why or how? Because, says the commentary, such is the first law of nature, and because nature geometricizes universally in all her manifestations. There is an inherent law, not only in the primordial, but also in the manifested matter of our phenomenal plane, by which nature correlates with geometrical forms and later also her compound elements, and by which there is no place for accident or chance. It is a fundamental law in occultism that there is no rest or cessation of motion in nature. That which seems rest is only the change of one form into another, the change of substance going hand in hand with that of form, as we are taught in occult physics, which thus seems to have anticipated the discovery of the conversation of matter by the considerable time. Says the ancient commentaries, 2 stanza 4, the mother is the fiery fish of life. She scatters her spawns in the breath or motion, heats and quickens it. The grains of spawns are soon attracted to each other and form the curds in the ocean of space. The larger clumps coalesce and receive new spawns, and fiery dots, triangles, and cubes, which ripen, and at an appointed time, some of the lumps detach themselves and assume spherical form, a process which they effect only when not interfered with by others, after which law number whatever comes into operation. Motion, or the breath, becomes the whirlwind and sets them into rotation. So before I get into this, I want to discuss what they're talking about when they say whirlwind. Now remember, in the very first episode of Becoming No One, season 1, I talked about us being toroidal fields and us basically being like the Tasmanian devil. When we speed up through time, we turn into pure energy, kind of like a tornado. And when we slow down, we materialize, and we're limited by those material aspects or characteristics. But when we speed up, we can move through space and time quickly, okay? That is the whirlwind that is caused by motion. The only reason why we can speed up and slow down is because we're in constant vibration. We're in constant motion. So when they say raise your vibration, they mean speed up your vibration. When they talk about people lowering your vibration, they mean slowing down your vibration. So the only reason why we are this toroidal field or this whirlwind is because we are in motion. Now, this part is referring to the great breath of life, which we now understand is the cause of all motion in this material plane, because we cannot be a living manifested being without being in motion. Okay, we know this because the principle of vibration. Now, it is also explained again where we learned a while back about the germs of potential being created in this state of non-being while the universe is at rest, right? You remember they talked about the milky curds of material that is there sitting, waiting to be activated, right? The unmanifested potential waiting to be activated by the spark or the breath of life. Now, when the great breath of life radiates, which is light, produces heat, or heat, which produces light, it is activated into new universes and new worlds. Now, the great breath is just motion, which creates heat. So if you want to continue to live, we have to continue to breathe. Now, this is just something random that I want y'all to know. and that a lot of people may not know, that we breathe entirely too fast, okay? And things like chewing gum actually speeds up our breaths, because when you're chewing gum, you're taking shorter breaths. You're not really supposed to chew gum, because you're really supposed to breathe in 8 seconds and breathe out 8 seconds. Now, I want you to start practicing this in your home, and you're going to feel a little dizzy when you first start doing it, because a lot of us have been breathing entirely too fast, okay? See how much your anxiety decreases, because this actually regulates your nervous system, how your body aches decrease, right? Because when you are in survival mode, your body tightens up, right? When you're not in survival mode, right, your body loosens. So if you're breathing properly and your central nervous system is actually regulated, you won't have the tightness and aches in your body. See how clear your mind is going to be, because we know breathing sends oxygen to the brain. And it's also how we get our stomach flat too, I'm just saying. Before I jump into part 5, I want you to take note that I said light produces heat, heat produces light. And I also want you to take note of the part where they said that we are all the same and we all contain the same things. We have to understand that we are all one. We're the same thing being experienced at different variables, okay? So you correlate with people because y'all have some of the same stuff in common, but y'all just are experiencing it at different variables, if that makes sense. That's why you can walk around and you could be talking to somebody and they'll bring something to light in you, because they're doing something that you don't want to do, and then you realize that you're actually doing it. So everybody's just going around projecting their shit onto other people, but sometimes those projections are relevant to your life. And they're illuminated in people around you, because you attract the vibration that you're in right then and there. So if you're in this vibration and you start to outgrow this vibration, right, and you start to look around at the people around you, they contain things that you need to fix in order for you to level up. Now, part 5 says, which is darkness, the balance or the no number, Adi Nadana, Sabhavat, the balance circle for X unknown quantity. 1, the Adi Sanat, the number, for he is one. 2, the voice of the word, Sabhavat, the numbers, for he is 1 and 9. 3, the formless square, Arupa. And these 3 enclosed within the balanced circle are the sacred 4, and the 10 are the Arupa, subjective, formless universe. Then comes the suns, the 7 fighters, the 1, the 8 left out, and his breath, which is the light maker, Bhaskara. Part A says, Adi Sanat, translated literally, is the first of primeval, ancient, which names identifies the Kabbalistic Ancient of Days and the Holy Aged. Sephrina and Adam Kadmon, with Brahma, the creator, called also Sanat among his other names and titles. Sabvahat is the mystic essence, the plastic root of physical nature, numbers, when manifested, the number in its unity of substance on the highest plane. The name is of Buddhist use and a synonym for the fourfold, Amina Mundi, the Kabbalistic archetypical world, from whence proceeds the creative, formative, and the material worlds. The sparks, the various other worlds contained in the last 3. The worlds are all subject to rulers and regents, rishis and pitris within the Hindus, angels with the Jews, and Christian gods with the ancients in general. Brahma is the symbol or essence of the universe from which everything emanates and into which all returns. It's the spirit or the mind, soul and body at once. In the physical cosmic sense, it is the universe, the planetary chain, and the earth. In the spiritual, it is the unknown deity, planetary spirit, and the man. Now, man is the son of spirit and matter. It's manifested logos. So Sabahat in the physical form is numbers that create the physical world, created by the universal soul, or the Amina Mundi. It's the archetype of each world, which creates the form for the material worlds. Remember, we said in the higher self episode that each planet has an archetype that must be followed, which is where we get what each planet represents in astrology. So Mars, war, Jupiter, expansion, Earth, support, balance. That all comes from the Sabvahat. Each world has its rulers, which are archangels, gods, rishis, pretis, diakons, which start to develop in this 4th stanza. Now, part B says the balanced circle. This means that the balanced circle, or the 0, becomes a figure or number only when one of the 9 figures precede it, and this manifests its value and potency. So the world or logos in union with voice and spirit, the expression and source of consciousness, standing for the 9 figures and thus forming with the cipher the decade, which contains in itself all the universe. The triad forms within the circle the tetrakitis, which basically is just a tetrad, or the sacred four, and the square within the circle being the most potent of all the magical figures. So as I stated before, the tetrakris is a Greek word for tetrad, which is just a group or arrangement of four, which has 10 points within its 3 lines. So think of a triangle with 9 triangles in the middle of it, kind of like those games where they say, how many triangles do you see? Okay. Now the top dot of that triangle represents the monad in unity, where all proceeds from containing the same essence, meaning that everything comes from this monad. And the 10 dots within the triangle represent the phenomenal world, or the effect of the subjective world. And the 3 lines of the triangle that are all equidistant from each other represent the noumenal world, or the cause or objective world. So this triangle actually separates us from the mental world, though, so the world of thought. So you have in the universe, and everything that is supposed to make up the universe, you have spiritual and material, or spirit matter. Now, there are many meanings of the tetrad, but what you need to know is that there is a higher tetrad and a lower tetrad. Religion usually talks about the lower, but you have both. The tetrad combines all the material from which the cosmos are produced. It's the idea of the one evolving the many. So the 1 and the 9, which is 10, which 10 means completion. But it also represents the illusion, because the points within the triangles are what makes the other triangles. But if you look at it as a whole, when the triangle is solid, then the points are just an illusion, and they're not visible to the eye. So the tetrad is the form of perfection. It is the first unmanifested logos, because it's the first to emerge from the all, or the zero, and in turn it's called the one, because we have to be able to distinguish it from the zero. Okay, so the main point is that the tetrad is like this first monad to separate from this state of non-being, and it contains the whole universe, kind of how the lotus flower contains the entire flower before it is even manifested. So it's unmanifested potential, because it's the first logos. Now part C says, the one rejected is the son of our system. The exoteric version may be found in the oldest Sanskrit scriptures, in the Rig Veda, Aditi, the boundless or infinite space, translated by Mr. Max Muller, the visible infinite, visible by the naked eye. The endless expanse beyond the earth, beyond the clouds, beyond the sky, is equivalent of mother space, coeval with darkness. She is very properly called the mother of the gods, Deva Matri, as it is from her cosmic matrix that all of the heavenly bodies of our system were born, sun and planets. Thus she is described allegorically in this wise. 8 sons were born from the body of Aditi. She approached the gods with 7, but cast away the 8th, Martanda, our son. The 7 sons, called the Adityas, are cosmically or astronomically the 7 planets, and the sun being excluded from their number shows plainly that the Hindus may have known, and in fact knew, of the 7th planet without calling it Uranus. But esoterically and theologically, so to say, the Adityas are, in their primitive, most ancient meaning, the 8 and the 12 great gods of the Hindu pantheon. The 7 allows the mortals to their dwelling, but show themselves only to the Arhat, says the old Proverbs. Their dwelling, standing here to mean like their planet, these planets. The ancient commentary gives an allegory and explains it. 8 houses were built by mother, 8 houses for 8 divine sons, 4 large and 4 small, 8 brilliant sons according to their age and merit. Bali Ilu, or Martanda, was not satisfied, though his house was the largest. He began to work as the huge elephants do. He breathed, drew into his stomach the vital airs of his brothers. He sought to devour them. The large 4 were far away, far on the margin of their kingdom. They were not robbed or affected, and laughed. Do your worst, sir. You cannot reach us, they said. But the smallers wept. They complained to the mother. She exiled Bali Ilu to the center of her kingdom, from whence he could not move. Since then, he only watches and threatens. He pursues them, turning slowly around himself, they turning swiftly from him, and he following from afar in the direction in which his brothers move on the path that encircles their house. From that day, he fed on the sweat of the mother's body. He fills himself with the breath and refuse. Therefore, she rejects him, thus the rejected son being our son, evidently as shown above, the sons refer not only to our planet, but to the heavenly bodies in general. Himself only a reflection of the central spiritual sun, Surya is the prototype of all these bodies that evolved after him. In the Vedas, he is called Loko Kakshash, the eye of the world, our planetary world, and he is one of the three chief deities. He is called indifferently the son of Dayas and of Aditi, because no distinction is made with reference to or scope allowed for esoteric meaning. Thus, he is depicted as drawn by 7 horses and by one horse with 7 heads, the former referring to his 7 planets, the latter to their one common origin from the one cosmic element. The one element is called figuratively fire. The Vedas teach that the fire verily is all the deities. The meaning of the allegory is plain, for we have both the Dasein commentary and modern science to explain it, though the two differ in more than one particular. The occult doctrine rejects the hypothesis born out of the nebular theory that the 7 great planets have evolved from the sun's central mass, not of this, our visible sun at any rate. This first condensation of cosmic matter, of course, took place about a central nucleus, its parent sun. But our sun, it is taught, merely detached itself earlier than all the others as the rotating mass contracted and is their elder, bigger brother, therefore not their father. The 8 Adityas, or the gods, are all formed from the eternal substance, commentary matter, or the mother, or the world stuff, which is both the 5th and 6th cosmic principle. The Upadhi, or basis of the universal soul, just as in man, the microcosm mana is the Upadhi of Buddhi. So this part is explaining the suns, or the 7 fighters, which are our planets, by telling an allegory that the sun is the 8th planet, meaning the sun in the sky, but was exiled from the system because it wanted to consume the smaller planets. The 1 or the 8th left is talking about the exile of his breath, which is the light maker. We know that everything living has motion, which is breath, and that motion creates heat, which can produce light, hence the light maker. What we need to know is that the sun is made from the mother like the other planets. However, it receives its breath of life or spark before the others. So it's the oldest, so it detached quicker than others by contracting and expanding before the other planets were able to do this. Okay, now as we know, there are more than 7 planets, but the main 7 planets are the most important because they're the closest and affect our energy on a more intense level than the further planets. Now, I'm just assuming that based off what they're saying, so don't take that part as bond. Now, part D says, there is a whole poem on the pregenetic battle fought by the growing planets before the final formation of cosmos, thus accounting for the seamlessly disturbed position of systems of several planets, the plane of the satellites of some, of Neptune and Uranus, for instance, of which the ancients knew nothing, it is said, being tilted over, thus giving them an appearance of retrograde motion. These planets are called the warriors, the archetypes, and are accepted by the Roman Church as the leaders of the heavenly hosts, thus showing the same tradition. Having evolved from cosmic space and before the final formation of the primaries and the annihilation of the planetary nebula, the sun, we are taught drew into the depths of its mass all the cosmic vitality he could, threatening to engulf his weaker brothers before the law of attraction and repulsion was finally adjusted, after which he began feeding on the mother's refuse and sweat, in other words, on those particular portions of aether, so the breath of the universal soul, of the existence and constitution of which seen is as yet absolutely ignorant. A theory of this kind having been propounded by Sir William Grove, who theorized that the systems are gradually changing by atmospheric addition and subtraction, or by accretion and diminution arising from nebular substance, and again that the sun may condense gaseous matter as it travels in space, and so heat may be produced. The archaic teaching seems scientific enough even in this age. Mr. W. Matthew Williams suggested that the diffused matter of ether, which is the recipient of the heat radiation of the universe, is thereby drawn into the depth of the solar mass. Expelling thence the previously condensed and thermally exhausted aether, it becomes compressed and gives us its heat, which he supposes to be in this way taken by the aether and again concentrated and redistributed by the suns of the universe. This is about as close an approximation to the occult teachings as science ever imagined. From occultism, explained it by the dead breath given back by Martanda, which is our sun, in his feeding on the sweat and refuse of mother space. What could affect Neptune, Saturn, and Jupiter but little? would have killed such comparatively small houses as Mercury, Venus, and Mars. As Uranus was not known before the end of the 18th century, the name of the fourth planet mentioned in the allegory must remain to us so far as a mystery. This is just telling us that one, there might be a planet that's unaccounted for, and two, it's explaining the theories that have been presented about why the planets are revolving around the sun and how they got their tilt in their axis. Now the next part says, the breath of all the seven is said to be the Bashkara, or the light maker, because they, the planets, were all comets and suns in their origin. They evolved into manivecteric life from the primeval chaos, now the noumenon of irresolvable nebulae, by aggregation and accumulation of the primary differentiations of the eternal matter, according to the beautiful expression in the commentary. Thus the sons of light clothe themselves in the fabric of darkness. They are called allegorically the heavenly snails on account of their, to us, formless intelligence inhabiting unseen their starry and planetary homes, and so to speak, carrying them as the snail do along with themselves in the revolution. The doctrine of a common origin of all the heavenly bodies and planets was, as we see, inculcated by the archaic astronomer before Kepler, Newton, Leibniz, Kant, Herschel, and Laplace. Heat, the breath, attraction, and repulsion. The three great factors of motion are conditioned under which all the members of all this primitive family are born, developed, and die, to be reborn after a night of Brahma, during which eternal matter relapses periodically into its primary undifferentiated state, or this state of non-being. The most attenuated gases can give no idea of its nature to the modern physicist. Centers of forces, at first, the invisible spark of primordial atoms, differentiate into molecules and become suns, passing gradually into objectively gaseous, radiant, cosmic, the one whirlwind or motion, finally giving the impulse to the form, and the initial motion, regulated and sustained by the never-resting breaths, the Dayan Kohan. Okay, so what we do know is that motion is created by three factors: heat, attraction, and repulsion, or you can think of this as contraction and expansion. So the heat is what we talk about when we say this great breath or this spark. All of the planets, including the sun, were born under this process, and the great breath of heat sweeps across the chaos and activates this life force, causing attraction and repulsion. So again, when we talked about those milky curds that were created in this state of rest, that when the second radiation of logos sweeps across the mother deep or the chaos and activates these germs or this unmanifested potential, that's what we're talking about right now. And when it activates these germs, they start to contract and expand, kind of like as if you were breathing. Okay, so they contract and expand until they are able to stabilize their motion. Now the planets will continue to go through these attraction and repulsion cycles throughout their evolutionary cycle into death, or the relapse of the planet back into the all, or this state of undifferentiated matter, the state of non-being, the zero, whatever you want to call it. The planetary spirits, or the Dayan Kohans, are responsible for stabilizing the energy, creating the form, and regulating the motions. Part 6 says, then the second seven, who are the Lipika, produced by the three, word, voice, and spirit. The rejected sun is one, and the sun, which is sun as in a child, suns, as in sun in the sky, are countless. So the Lipiki, from the word lipai, which means writing, means literally scribes. So mystically, these divine beings are connected with karma, the law of retribution, for they are the recorders or analysts who impress onto us invisible tablets of the astral light, the great picture gallery of eternity, a faithful record of every act and a even thought of man, of all that was, is, or will ever be in the phenomenal universe. As said in Isis, the divine and unseen canvas of the book of life, as it is the Lipika who projects into objectivity from the passive universal mind the idea plan of the universe, upon which the builders reconstruct the cosmos after every pralaya. It is they who stand parallel to the seven angels of the presence, whom the Christians recognize in the seven planetary spirits, or the spirit of the stars. For thus it is they who are the direct amanuenses of the eternal ideation, or as called by Plato, the divine thought. The eternal record is no fantastic dream, for we meet with the same records in the world of gross matter. A shadow never falls upon a wall without leaving thereupon a permanent trace, which might be made visible by resorting to proper processes, says Dr. Draper. The portrait of our friends or landscape views may be hitting on the sensitive surface from the eye, but they are ready to make their appearance as soon as proper development are resorted to. A spectrum is concealed on the silver and glassy surface until, by our necromancy, we make it come forth into the visible world. Upon the walls of our most private apartments, where we think the eye of intrusion is altogether shut out, and our retirement can never be profane, there exist the vestiges of all our acts, silhouettes of whatever we have done. Dr. Javan and Babbage believe that every thought displacing the particles of the brain and setting them in motion scatter them throughout the universe, and they think that each particle of the existing matter must be a register of all that has happened. This comes from Principle of Science, Volume 2, page 455. Thus, the ancient doctrine has begun to acquire rights of citizenship in the speculation of the science world. So let me explain this. So this very first part is talking about karma, or the law of cause and effect. The Lipikas are the recorders of karma. Remember in the astral plane episode, we talked about the 4 cardinal points and the 4 Deva Rajas who are responsible for protecting us, but they're also the agents of karma. Yeah, these 4 have to come from this race of Lipikas, but that's just an assumption. Now, they record every act and thought of man, which should tell you that your thoughts are just as important as your actions, because they both create karma. So make sure they align. Now, every action we take or every thought we think leaves a permanent impression that is being recorded and shaped by astral light or impression of these records. The builders create the form, but the Lipikas decide the divine plan for each activity period and impress the corresponding astral light onto the subjects for the purpose of scribing the results. The next part says the 40 assessors who stand in the region of Amenti as the accusers of the soul before Osiris belong to the same class of deities as the Lipikas and might stand paralleled were not the European gods so little understood in the esoteric meaning. The Hindu Chitragupta, who reads out the account of every soul's life from his register called Agra Sandhani, the assessor who reads there from their heart of the defunct, which becomes an open book before whether Yama, Minos, Osiris, or Karma, are all so many copies of and variants from the Lipikas in their astral records. Nevertheless, the Lipikas are not deities connected with death, but with eternal life. Connected as the Lipikas are with the destiny of every man and the birth of every child, whose life is already traced in the astral light, not fatalistically, but only because the future, like the past, is ever alive in the present. They may also be said to exercise an influence on the science of horoscopy, which is horoscopes. We must admit the truth of the latter, whether we will or not, for as observed by one of the modern adepts of astrology, now that photography has revealed to us the chemical influence of the sidereal system, by fixing on the sensitized plate of the apparatus milliard of stars and planets that had hereunto baffled the efforts of the most powerful telescope to discover them, it becomes easier to understand how our solar system can, at birth of a child, influence his brain, virgin of any impression, in a definite manner and according to the presence of the zenith of such or another zodiac constellation. Now, this last part is just pointing out that the Lipikas are agents of eternal life and not death. They come up with the universal plan and impress the plan upon the astral light, so they play a role in everything that is born or manifested. When we understand this, it won't be hard for us to understand horoscopes and astrology and how where the planets sit in the sky at the time of your birth affect your energetic design. So we can also throw human design in there too. So just to recap, Stanza 1 tells us about the first logos, this beingness or what we call non-being. Stanza 2 tells us about this second logos, or this state of being and non-being at the same time, or you're just basically like unmanifested potential or like an idea thought before action comes into play. And stanza 3 tells us about the third logos, which is where we manifest activity or manifested activity starts to happen. Stanza 4 is about the creation of the planetary spirits, gods, angels, devas, rishis, pitris, whatever you want to call them, that help build and form the planet into their planned archetype, which were developed by these record keepers called Lipikas, which just means scribes. In conclusion, the resources are the same for this episode: The Secret Doctrine by Helena Blavatsky, the Asafi Wiki, The Secret Book of Daizan, right? And next week we'll talk about stanza 5, which talks about the creation of planetary systems and single planets. We started to hit on that today, but we'll go into deep detail next week. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It brought me so much clarity. So if you have not subscribed to my channel, please do so we don't lose contact, because I don't know what the hell's gonna happen with TikTok. I love y'all deep, and I'll see y'all next week.